Okay, perfect. So I'm Julie Axt. I introduced myself earlier. I am the analyst for Cohort 1, and Deanna Ridgway, my colleague here, is the analyst for Cohort 2. We're going to discuss today the invoice submission process, and then after I discuss that, in about 15 minutes, you'll hear from Deanna, who will be going over budget modification instructions, as well as allowable expenses. So, where do you find your invoice? Right on the BSCC website. So above in small writing, we have our website address. And the first step on the home page is, if you look, there is a block here that shows grants, and that's what you will click on to get to your invoice. This will take you to our quick links location, and this is something you're actually going to live in a little bit more. This is where your progress reports are. This is where your grant staff assignments are listed. A lot of information here for you, and this is also where your grantee invoicing is also listed. So once you get to that location, it's going to list all of the different grants that the BSCC supports. And if you see, there's one highlighted in red that says Prop 47. As of now, it will say Prop 47, and then once you click into it, it will say Cohort 1 or Cohort 2. That is now newly located on the website. We just didn't have the slide ready for you prior to putting that up. I know that there is some overlapping cohorts, and so just as a quick reminder to make sure when you're living in one of the invoices that you're practicing on that cohort, and just to kind of just give you a forewarning not to mix that data up. And then this is, again, this is a sample from Cohort 1, so Alameda County, you're here today. And so we've got you highlighted right there. That's where you would click on your Excel spreadsheet. Now this is the fun part. Opening that Excel, once you click on it, you're going to want to save it to your local computer. When you save it, please do not change the naming of the Excel spreadsheet. That will not save any of the formulas that are in there, and you'll have to restart. So just as a forewarning, save as, and leave it at that. And oh, here's a new, this is the first time we've brought this up in the presentation. If you see in blue, this is the new email for the Cohort 2. Again, some of the double cohorts are going to have two different emails to send data to, and the new one for Cohort 2 is BSCC Prop 47 grants2 at bscc.ca.gov. So to open your invoice, it will be a password protected document, and so you're going to want to put in your contract number, and that's 3 digits with a hyphen, and then the year of your starting cohort, which is 19. For those of you that are overlapping cohorts, your 3 digits will be the same, so you just want to know the difference between 17 and 19. So a very important thing to note is when you open to start data entering into your workbook, you want to make sure that you hit the button Enable Content. What that does is that enables macros. What macros is a functionality in the workbook that allows all the formulas to work together. And so it's very important that you do that. Just a forewarning, enabling the macros will not compromise your local computer or your network. And then just a note here, when you're filling out your invoices, you want to make sure that you're entering into the correct one. So whether you have selected quarterly or monthly reimbursements, you will see a corresponding invoice. So invoice 1, 2, 3, 4. You want to definitely lock into that tab to fill out the information. What's nice about that is it becomes intuitive and it starts looking as aggregate data as you start filling out period over period, and you can start seeing how you're using your funds and what's left. There are also some additional tabs to the right of the workbook. The first one is how you do the budget modification, which Deanna will introduce us to later on. There's also your invoice due dates, which Ricardo went over in the administrative side, but it's also a quick reference tab right here. And then again, the instructions, like we're going over right now, all listed for you for your reference. So now it's time to report the funds. And so I kind of created a little thing I like to use just to remind me of how this worksheet works. Everything on this worksheet has formularies in them, and they're locked. So the only ones you want to work with are the green colored cells. So I always say green means go, all others mean no. So at the top, you're going to want to put in your related funds per line item. All the line items are listed to the left, and then you can put in through grant funds or leveraged funds. And then below that, whatever funds you put into that spreadsheet, they were filtered here by line item. And then you're going to want to put in your descriptions for how the expected expenditures occurred. To the right of your workbook, we've provided you with some sample expenditure descriptions, just what we're looking for as analysts especially. Now for leverage funds, we need to do the same thing. The leverage funds information will populate to the left in gray, just like they do for the regular grant funds. And then you want to provide a high level detail on what was included in those leverage funds, just like you do the grant funds. And then here's some sample descriptions. It's a little small, but it is in your PowerPoint presentation, copy in your workbook. We are looking for just high-level things, and if we do need further explanation, we'll reach out to you for questions. So once you've entered the data, we want to make sure that we're clear that whoever fills out the workbook, there is a preparer, and then there is a financial officer that signs the authorization. They must be two different people, and they must be included in your program contact information. So they should be separate, just to, again, reiterate. And then the financial officer that's authorized signer will hit the certified button to certify that the data is correct. And by hitting that certified button, that's essentially your signature to the workbook. Now, how do you submit your invoice? There's two different ways. There's maybe some of you that have Outlook configured on your network or your local computer. And if you do have Outlook configured, you can use the submit button and it'll send it straight to us. You don't even have to worry about getting into your email and sending it off. If you do not have Outlook, all you need to do, again, is save the changes and email it to the BSCC Prop 47 grants to email. And then some additional tips. Every period that you send an invoice, you want to go back to the website and download the more refreshed version. That's because your past information will be stored in the newer invoice, and it will be locked. You can look at past data, but we want to keep a running total, so that's why we'd like you to go back to the web every reporting period, whether that be monthly or quarterly, and download a fresh invoice. So this is a high-level summary of the invoice process we wanted to introduce to you. So you download the most current invoice off the website and submit it to us electronically via either the submit button or your email. One of Deanna or I will review it for accuracy and then forward it to Ricardo for approval. Once Ricardo approves it, he will provide it back to us so we can start the accounting process. We submit it to the state controller's office, and then they send the checks directly to you. So that's a little summary of the invoice processing submission process, pardon me. Any questions? You will be allowed to ask questions after Deanna's done. Yes? You are correct. I'm going to ask Callie to address that.
You mean out of the office for an extended period of time. Okay. Anything like that, you just want to get pre-approval from your field rep for that. Yeah, and once that's okay, then we can go ahead and put that invoice through. But it would need to be somebody that's listed on the grant, somebody that's, you know, has that authority. But we would need something in writing via email or something, just get an approval from Ricardo. Right. So via email ahead of time, if the one that's on the contact sheet is not there, and you let Ricardo know ahead of time, then we would have that documentation via email or whatever to put in the file, but just as long as it's pre-approved. Yep.
So now Deanna gets to talk about the exciting world of budget modifications.
So, okay. All right, I'm going to briefly review the budget modification process. We're also going to go over a few scenarios that you might run into. And then we're also going to go briefly over the eligible and ineligible project expenses. Okay. All right, so a budget modification. You need to submit this form anytime you're going to change one funding line item to another. Okay. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you receive information from your field rep first. So you need to contact the field rep before submitting a budget modification. You need to discuss it with him or her. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you complete the form, you're going to provide adequate justification for your budget modification. And also, please allow about approximately 10 working days to complete this process. So once properly submitted to the BSCC, please give us approximately 10 working days to return it to you. Okay? All right, if you notice that if you have your invoice workbook, this is a sample invoice workbook, and at the bottom, at the end of all of the invoices, you'll notice that there's the budget modification tab. Okay, and with this, once again, reiterating what Julie presented, green is a go. So making sure that you complete all of the green sections for this form. So starting with making sure that if you have more than one budget modification, you indicate that. But if it's your first one, please just put one. And then you also want to make sure that you also provide the number of the invoice that this is for. So if you are providing your budget modification 1 for invoice 5, please put that on here. If it's budget modification 2 for invoice 10, if you have 10, please make sure that you provide that information as well. Okay, and this is just a sample of your current budget and your available budget. So when completing this form, you'll know what you're working with at the time. Okay. All right, and this is the area that you really want to pay more attention to as well. This is where you're going to place your changes. So if you decide that you want to indicate an area that you want to remove with a minus sign or with the parentheses, either way, it's going to run into parentheses. So you'll notice parentheses on your page for the ones taking away, and then the other ones will be in the positive. But you will make sure that if you do whenever you complete the changes, you have to make sure that that bottom area is 0, because if it's not 0, you will not be able to submit the form. It will give you an error message. Okay. And here's our justification area. Please make sure that you provide as much detail as possible. So if you have any numbers, so if you're saying I want to remove $10,000 from my CBO and I want to put it in salaries and benefits, please make sure that you indicate the amount and give a full explanation of why you're requesting that. Okay, and once again, reiterating what Julie presented earlier, just making sure that you have 2 different people completing this form as well. You're going to have your person preparing the form as well as your financial officer completing the form, and just making sure we have that information prior to submission. Yes? Yes, it is. Thank you. We are actually going to discuss that in just 1 second as well. Okay? But thank you. Very good question. Okay. All right. And once again, reiterating the certified button, making sure that the financial officer is the one certifying this. If you have someone that's replacing them, making sure that they're the ones pressing this button. You're just checking it off. And then what you're more concerned about is the submission, so just making sure that you submit it, and it's the financial officer submitting it. And the reason being is that once it's submitted, we will receive an email to our agency, and it will show us who actually submitted it. So if it's someone else in your office that submitted it, we'll see that it doesn't match the financial officer. So that's why we're putting so much emphasis on making sure it's the correct person with the submission, okay? And what's going to happen, once again, is it's going to go to the BSCC website. It's going to go to BCC inbox, and this one in particular has macros that will be delegated for the cohort 2, okay? And that's the email at the bottom, okay? And you will do the same thing if you don't have Outlook. You'll just make sure that you attach it and send it to the email as well. Okay? All right, so takeaways. Making sure that before you submit a budget modification, making sure that you discuss it with the field representative before making that submission. And then also just letting you know that once you make the submission to us, you will receive an email from us. So we will email you letting you know that your budget modification was approved, and we'll give you a new workbook. And that's when you'll be able to submit your invoice to us that is for the budget modification that you submitted. Okay, and this is just a visual overview of the 10-day process for us after you make your submission to us. This is also in your binder. Okay, so we're going to go over a few scenarios. We're actually going to go over 3 scenarios where you would possibly submit a budget modification, okay? And this is actually in your binder as well. So I'm actually going to read them, okay? So scenario number 1 for a budget modification. Your agency submitted a proposal which projected a plan to contract client case management to another governmental agency. You experienced a delay in startup for your project and discovered the agency is no longer going to be able to provide the services. You have determined that you can hire a new employee for the remainder of the grant period who can take on the case management workload. As a result, you will have to move funds from the professional services category to the salaries and benefits category to cover the new employee's payroll. So for this scenario, yes, you will have to submit a budget modification because you are moving funding from one line item to another, okay? Scenario number 2. In your original proposal, your agency allocated a position with very specific mental health qualifications. This position was deemed essential to this program because of the person's specific qualifications and training. After a few months, the person in this position decided to leave your agency. You're able to hire 2 part-time people to get most of the work done, but will have to reduce the type of services and the quality from those originally proposed. However, there will be no change in the budget as the cost of both part-time persons is the same as the cost of the original employee. You will still have to submit a budget modification. And the reason being is because you're making a change to the salaries and benefits overall. And then also, you will have to provide us with a justification of how these new hires are going to be qualified for the position. Okay. Final scenario. Your agency fostered an alliance with a community-based organization when writing the proposal. 2 months into the grant, the CBO stopped performing and became apparent that you would need to replace their services with a new CBO in order to meet your projections. You found a new CBO to replace the one that is non-performing, who also has the ability to offer additional services and expand the geographical area in which you are serving. However, their services are going to cost more than the initial CBO. So for this one's kind of a tricky one. What's happening here is that you will only need to submit a formal budget modification if you're going to plan on reallocating funds from one line item to another in order to cover the cost of this new CBO, okay? But please know that although you may not be moving funds, you also want to make sure that you contact BSCC to inform us of this change, because you're going to need to discuss that with the field rep, because there might be additional documentation you need to submit, such as your Appendix B that you saw in your binder earlier. Okay. All right. So Ricardo briefly went over some of these earlier, so I'm not going to go over all of them. This information can also be found on our website in our grant administration guide. So as you know, we want to make sure we reiterate with the question that was given earlier that yes, you do want to include both your leverage funds and grant funds. So these eligible projected costs are also for your leverage funds. okay? So this includes your salaries and benefits, your professional services and public agency subcontracts, okay? And here's a list of additional items. One thing I want to reiterate as well is that if you are purchasing any fixed assets or equipment and any one item exceeds $3,500, so per item, that you need to make sure that you get the approval first from the field representative before you purchase any of these items. And then also, you discussed earlier some of the miscellaneous costs. Please make sure that you receive prior approval as well. And this is especially for program incentives that may have a monetary amount included to them. Okay? And here's some additional project expenses that are eligible, making sure that you receive prior approval before you go purchase cars, lease vehicles, those items. And then also the same for food and beverages, making sure that you receive approval as well. Okay? All right. And these are a list of the ineligible project expenses. This is not limited to this list, but this is just some that are included. And once again, there's that $3,500 per item for fixed assets. Okay. And then go ahead and please read this at your leisure. It's also provided in your binder for both eligible and ineligible project expenses. Okay. And once again, this information can also be found in more detail in our BSCC Grants Administration Guide. Okay. Any questions, concerns for either budget modifications, anything that you heard? Everything seems good? Okay. All right, well, here's my information. I'm going to be the Cohort 2 program analyst. So my name is Deanna Ridgway. So anytime you email me, please be careful of the no E. I know it's spelled weird, not my fault. And it'll look like Bridgeway, but it's Ridgway. What happens when you have more than one last name. And here's my desk number. Oh, well, there's my desk number. So if you want to make sure that you have that information, and once again, you can also contact me or Julie Axe here with Cohort 1. And this is our supervisor, and this is Callie Sanders. Okay? Thank you so much.
So the last things we want to wrap up with you are some of the resources that are on tab 4 for fiscal responsibilities. And so I'd just like to introduce to you some of the things that we've. Oh, okay, perfect. We're going to get visuals here. Anti-instructions. Okay. So the first thing you will see past the pink paper is the grantee instructions for completing the invoice supporting document packet. The reason we do this is to provide you some sort of resources as what is needed or what's the ideal record keeping you want to have in case you do get an audit. It's a supportive process from us to you. And so just keeping in mind that these are the documentation we're looking for, how preparation should go, what receipts we're looking for, how you should document salaries and benefits, services and supplies, and so on. And so it's a great resource to have, and it is right there in your binder. If you go to the second after the next pink one, you will see, okay. This is one that I'm really fond of. Actually, a lot of the individuals in Cohort 1 that supply invoices to me frequently supply this to me as an aid for me to correct for accuracy and just verify expenditures. So this is a great salaries and benefits worksheet that you have as well. And it's, again, you know, any supportive documents we can provide you to eliminate any kind of rough spots when an audit could happen, we're here to do that for you. And then there's last one. Is the grantee invoice supporting documentation checklist. So it gives you by a line item. It shows grants funds, leveraged funds, and what attached documents you have on file. It's a great resource for you as well, and any kind of comments that you'd like to put in Again, this is something that a lot of my Cohort 1 grantees do provide to me for supporting documents when I'm processing their invoices. Any questions? It is not required. A lot of the ones I've been working with that do submit them, they don't have, it's not a requirement. These are all supporting documents for desk reviews, especially, or particularly. I know a lot of people that like to be on top of things and very organized and detailed folks will use these documents when submitting.
There we go. The desk review process is going to be assigned basically to you. Cohort 1, those of you that would did for the first year, it was every invoice. And what this process is, it's kind of just an abridged version for us. We collect just a small packet of information to let us know that you're on top of it and you're keeping those records. So keeping of records for all of your expenditures, a detailed record is a requirement for the entire length of the grant, so the full 3 years. When we request these documents, they are required, and this is just a small packet, the information and instructions in there. So for instance, you talked about the salaries and benefits worksheet. That's basically just a cover page, and that's what we want with the desk review. But behind that, when we get that, we understand that for all of those salaries and benefits, the people you've listed there, you have on site all of the backup documentation, the timesheets, the timekeeping logs, all of the things that Ricardo will look at when he goes there. You keep on site as a requirement for the entirety of your grant. But when we ask for this, it's just those pages that we ask for in the desk review packet. Does that answer your question? Kind of? Yes? No? Anybody else? Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You get 15 more extra minutes for lunch.
You guys are too generous. The only other thing I'll add on the leverage funds, because it does come up, in terms of record keeping, please track your leverage funds the same way you would track your grant funds. And so what that kind of really in a high snapshot, the way that we've approached it is, if you've quantified something in your proposal budget, just be able to do the same for your leverage funds. And that's really what we're going to just be checking for. So far, that seems to be working in terms of the level of instruction that we're kind of receiving. So we're going to keep going with that approach for now on. And the other thing I will note is we recognize that having this information in this vacuum, it's hard to apply it. It just sounds like a lot until you actually get to try it, download it, et cetera. So again, we'll offer other opportunities to kind of do this as well. I know our team's been exploring just having some webinars because you'll be surprised, but we answered the same question 23 times, at least once a month. And it's through no fault of your own. I mean, you guys are asking honest, realistic questions. And so we're going to try to make some efforts to just make those kind of common questions available to you as well. So anything there? And I'll also note, we will schedule at some point quarterly calls. That's also another feature of the grant. And on the quarterly calls, that will be another opportunity for us to kind of talk this through in more detail. Again, once you have had a chance to apply it, you can ask more kind of specific questions. For those of you that are in Cohort 1 and Cohort 2, we're going to be talking a lot. We've yet to figure out quite yet how to make all the fun stuff work, but we certainly know it's a consideration.